We all have our reasons. We've all been burned. We're all a little rusty, coming out of these past few years, even if we at one point felt like, oh yeah, we're okay at this. We do an okay job of connecting with people around us. Now we might not feel that way anymore. So I do think giving each other grace and recognizing that it's just difficult and it's tricky and it feels scary in some way to try to reach out. You do make a good point that not everybody is going to be on board with this. I mean, that's just the reality, is that everybody's, living their own experience. And so, maybe the best way for you to be neighbors to those particular people is to give them that space. But there are other people around. And so my encouragement is to just keep finding those, kind of staying awake to what's happening around you in your place, whatever that happens to look like. And just being aware and present so that when those opportunities for connection come along, you're ready for it, and you're just willing to try again.
So we're talking with Shannan Martin. Start with hello and other simple ways to live as neighbors. And do we ever need to do that today?
Yes.
And Shannan, some people don't even know their neighbors.
Yeah.
And it's kind of embarrassing in some of the moves. And by the way, in radio, you move around a lot. You move in next door, and should I pick on you? I don't know if I should.
Go right ahead.
It's a daily event.
It's open season. We all know that.
But I'll just even pick on myself. Like, you move in next door to somebody, and why is it that, this one neighbor that I had, for the first 6 months, it's like, hey, guy. Instead of, even I'll just pick on myself. I meet someone and I'm like, really, I know I got the guy's name and I forget it instantaneously. Thank the Lord in heaven that I got their mail and yes, it said Tim and Amber on it. And so I finally,
that's amazing.
Yeah. And so I knew his name next time I saw him. And so I called him by name, but he still didn't know who we were. But, so I had one up on him, but, yeah. This is so where did this book come from? And I assume you needed some of this yourself.
Absolutely. My family moved into our neighborhood about 11 years ago. So it's been a while here. And through the process of living here, I've written 3 books. And as I write each book, I find that I'm chasing a particular question. They've all been kind of around this idea of community, neighbors, why does this matter, sort of thing. And so, I wrote my first 2 books. And for this book, Start with Hello, I was really chasing the question, how do I do it? It's the book that I wish I would have had 11 years ago, 20 years ago. It's just like, how do we break this all the way down and make it simpler to connect with the people near us? Because I don't think most of us learn that. I don't think most of us are taught those things. And so, I just started writing down anything that I've learned over this process of really digging into this topic and trying to understand, why does it matter for us to know our neighbors? Why does God seem to care so much about this idea of loving our neighbors? And anything I know, I have learned from my own neighbors, from the people around me.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about that we're aching for connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we are all longing for to know that we belong wherever we happen to be, even if we haven't quite admitted that to ourselves. I think that's just kind of a desire that's deep within us. I think we were made to know each other and to need each other, and it can feel, it can give us some anxiety. It feels like such a big thing, and it doesn't have to be big or scary. And that is why I wrote Start with Hello, to really simplify it and to give us some really practical tools for doing those things.
Okay, well, since you were going to pick on me, Hank, I'll just go ahead. I know. I'll go ahead and pick on myself. I feel like when it comes to our neighbors, we've been in our current house for, I don't know, like a year and a half almost. And they've made it very difficult to interact with them.
Wait a second. They have.
Let me finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You're making it difficult to interact with you right now, sir.
Every day, Shannon, every day.
Touche.
Welcome to the chaos. No, but I mean, we've tried to say hi and literally like backs turned. We can't get anything out of the people on either side of us. And so I will admit that now I spend my time being frustrated and judging them. Like that's just the first thing that comes to mind. And so I was really interested when you said if we're ever going to make it to each other, we need to swim in the current of empathy and we need to learn to really see each other. So would you say like, the kind of these judgments and just the frustrations, are those obstacles that prevent us from connecting with our neighbors?
Oh, absolutely. And I think our culture does its very best to keep us pitted against each other, to keep us kind of wary of each other, sizing each other up. Do we see the world from a similar lens? Do we believe the same way? Do we express our faith in similar ways? We're always looking for, what about us is comfortable and what about us is the same, really. And when we don't see those things, or when we see very clearly, oh, we disagree in some fundamental ways, or we see the world from really different perspectives, we then feel like the only course is to kind of retreat, to keep distance between us. And I'm guessing, we all have our reasons. we've all been burned. We're all a little rusty, coming out of these past few years, even if we at one point felt like, oh yeah, we're okay at this. We do an okay job of connecting with people around us. Now we might not feel that way anymore. So I do think giving each other grace and recognizing that it's just difficult and it's tricky and it feels scary in some way to try to reach out. You do make a good point that not everybody is going to be on board with this. I mean, that's just the reality, is that everybody's, living their own experience. And so, maybe the best way for you to be neighbors to those particular people is to give them that space. But there are other people around. And so my encouragement is to just keep finding those, kind of staying awake to what's happening around you in your place, whatever that happens to look like, and just being aware and present so that when those opportunities for connection come along, you're ready for it, and you're just willing to try again.
I like that. Good advice. What are a couple of other common obstacles that we can face in these situations, and maybe a couple of tips for getting around them?
I think the biggest obstacle, I'll speak for me personally, my biggest obstacles are twofold, maybe even threefold. Number one, we feel busy. We feel like life is already very full. Time feels hard to come by. Number two, I am an introvert and I am deeply introverted. I'm a social enough person, but if left up to me, I would almost always choose to stay inside and read my book. I have to really push past that continually. And then the other thing I think is just a huge barrier is that we are afraid of awkwardness. And we tell ourselves, oh, it's going to be so awkward, or they're going to think I'm awkward, or they're going to think I'm weird, or, all this kind of negative talk that we do. And the reality is, I don't have an answer for awkwardness. And I say throughout, start with hello, just let's expect it. Let's expect that it's going to be a little clunky and uncomfortable. It might be a little awkward, but I think we're all feeling that. And I know that we can survive that. So there comes a point in time where we just have to push past it and say, okay, this is going to feel a little wobbly, a little awkward, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to go first and put myself out there in some small way and see what happens.
Oh,
I love that.
It's good.
Yeah. When I first picked up your book, I thought, sure, this is going to be from somebody who's just socially in the flow and knows everything. And then I read page 21 where you say I'm an introvert, like you just mentioned. Me too. And so surprising in the work that I do, but it's true. You
Right.
could leave me alone for days and I'm happy with my own company.
Right.
Not
Yes.
sure how horrible that is, but it's just true. And that you
Yes.
feel emotionally allergic to small talk. Oh my gosh. Kank and Misty know that this is so true about me. The biggest thing I dread is that moment in church where we have to greet each other and say something.
Yes.
You know,
Right.
how are you? Fine, great.
Yeah, turn to your neighbor.
Oh,
Say,
yes.
No.
Yep.
boo.
That's when I've got to go run to the restroom. Now everybody knows.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And just that you're awkward, as you said, you know, thank you for relieving us of all those excuses, I think.
Yeah. That's kind of that's the bad news is we don't get to use that as our excuse, right? Like
No.
it doesn't exclude us from this conversation.
Oh, so, you know, I tend to think of the term BFF as something that is deeply ingrained, that we've built a relationship with somebody and it just happened. And yet, I love what you say, that relationships with people who cross our lives and yet have to say, no, not necessarily, and that we can take building relationships slowly. Thank you. Tell us more about that.
That's the life that I live here in this neighborhood and in my community, is that I had to come to a place of understanding, you know, being in a community, in a neighborhood where I knew nobody coming in, and I was in a very different phase of my life at that point. You know, I had small children. A lot about my life was different then, but I had to come to terms with the fact that this was going to be slow work, and that was okay. That a lot of this work of connection, because it is work, and I want to be clear about that. This isn't, you know, we assume that community is just going to happen for us, and then when it doesn't, we think maybe we're the ones, you know, getting something wrong. I'm here to say it is work, and it does require practice and intention, but it's work that can really seamlessly, you know, kind of fold into our regular, ordinary, full lives. And that a lot of that work looks kind of invisible. It looks very slow. It looks kind of hidden and almost like, you know, maybe nothing's actually happening here. But we're able to look behind us as time passes and see any relationship that we have right now in the world started at this really kind of street level, low to the ground, small stakes world where we're just waving or saying hello or doing kind of that awkward small talk. Every relationship we have started in that place. And so we can see with our own eyes and our own lives that very often those do grow and build over time. So the pressure is off of us to kind of make something big and amazing happen right now, but we can start poking those seeds into the ground as we're going about our lives and just being intentionally focused outward, looking at the people around us, at the places around us, and just being ready as those opportunities present themselves.
You know, you said something that maybe takes the pressure off a little bit. You said our desire to cultivate friendship by putting our best foot forward actually does the opposite.
Yeah.
It makes connection more difficult.
Oh.
We know this with our brains, but cannot break the habits of impressing. And as a result, we're lonely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, I think we might be able to pull it off now and then. You know, every once in a while, we might be able to pull it off. Like, okay, everything, we planned it, we pulled it off, everything went perfectly. The problem is, though, that now we have to do that again. Now we've set
Right.
that bar. We've set that bar at this place of like, if if I'm going to invite somebody over, everything's going to be perfect. At what point do we begin to just say, that's not how I live my life? My life is not this curated, perfect, nothing goes wrong world. I think our lives are all a little chaotic, a little boring, a little messy. So if we can start right off the bat by lowering that bar, it does take the pressure off, because then it's like, you know, you have people over and it's kind of haphazard and you make frozen pizza for dinner and the kids run wild and the house isn't perfect, but you have a lot of fun. And then when that evening comes to an end, you look forward to doing it again. And you know you can do it again because it's not too hard. If we make things too hard, we're much less likely to even try it in the first place. So I am all about, and this book is filled with tips on how to make it relatable and accessible and simple and imperfect. And just say, that's what real hospitality is this is my house. This is what we're like. This is what I'm really like. Welcome in.
Yeah, it's a good
Love it.
point. Why are we trying to be perfect anyway? Because
Right.
we're not.
Yeah.
We know we're not.
Yeah.
We know not.
They
We
know
know
we're
we're not.
not.
And we all. That's it. We all feel like it's just us. Like we're the one who doesn't have it all together. But I think most of us can remember a time when somebody maybe invited us into who they are or into their space, and it wasn't perfect, and we kind of breathe a sigh of relief, like, okay, this person doesn't have it all together, so maybe I don't have to have it all together either. That's such a beautiful place to build actual community.
Mm,
It's good.
love it. That's just powerful. I'm going to tell a story on my grandma real quick. She's gone, so she'll forgive me. But she loved to sew and work on her pictures. But when she moved to her extended living facility, she would never display all of that because that would ruin. I mean, she grew up in a different generation. That would remove the perfect image of everything in its place. And I learned a lot from watching how many opportunities were missed because she was
Yeah.
trying so hard to invite people into a perfect world that really wasn't. And so,
Yeah.
wow, I'm just echoing what you said, but thank you for that. The frozen
Yeah.
pizza did it for me.
Yeah.
Most of us can pull that off.
Yeah.
Most of us can pull off a frozen pizza and a bag of potato chips. And when we allow hospitality and connection to exist at that really humble place, that's where we're all most comfortable anyway.
Yep. That's true. Totino's pizzas rolls.
Yes.
They burn the inside of your mouth. You got to watch out though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Patience.
Yeah. You mentioned your favorite waking up practice involves walking, sky staring, and noticing the inherent beauty of your place. Sounds as if we or I should practice slowing down a bit. There's a story behind that. Talk about that.
Yeah. I stumbled into the practice years ago of walking my kids to the elementary school at the end of our street. It took me longer than it should have for me to realize that just made a lot of common sense for our lives. And so when we first moved here, I was just used to driving everywhere and we drove to school. It's ridiculous. But over time I started to see like, oh, we could just be walking and realizing, I really wanted to get to know my neighbors and my neighbors were all walking to school. And so just sometimes that practical level of like putting ourselves in the path of other people rather than constantly secluding in our car or minivan, and then you drive into the garage and the garage door goes down, and like we can exist without really connecting with people if we try. So sometimes just like taking that extra initiative. But what I found when I really started that practice of just taking walks in my neighborhood every single day was that noticing the beauty in my place. And I live in a neighborhood that maybe a lot of people wouldn't find as classically beautiful. It's, kind of an under-resourced, overlooked neighborhood. And I knew that it was important for me to find this place beautiful. And so as I started intentionally tracking down that beauty, it got into my bones. And it's like we find our place beautiful. We notice the beauty of creation and what's happening in the sky and what's happening in nature. Then we start to notice each other a little bit more. We start to notice, oh, this person lives here, and this is a little bit about their rhythm and routine. And then we start to love these people more. And over time, we find that we're being loved by the people around us. Like it's just this really beautiful flow that I think really has to begin with that intention to slow down and wake up to our actual lives, to the world where we live, to the people around us, so that when these opportunities come along, we're ready for them. We're looking for them and we're ready.
That's good. I like that.
I'm kind of the queen of snap judgments. I think that Kank and Sally will agree with that. I'll tell you that's true. And I know that I'm so guilty. It's one of my biggest pitfalls. There are so many times when I'll see somebody and I'm like, there's no way I'm going to relate to that person. Just based on like what I'm seeing. And I go on about my life. And maybe I've missed a really valuable or rewarding connection with somebody.
Yeah.
So, you talk about blind spots. Would you say this is an example of a blind spot? And if so, like, how do we find what our blind spots are so we can get around them and make those connections?
Yeah. I think we are taught to seek similarity, and in finding similarity, we find some sense of comfort. And so it's kind of this feedback loop that just perpetuates itself. So we're always kind of looking for another version of us. And when we do that, we just miss out on true abundance, on the truly abundant life where we get to kind of rub shoulders with difference and complexity. I think that's really how it's meant to be. But I think we all have to make that intentional switch to, I'm not going to be afraid of difference. I'm not going to see difference as in some way dangerous or threatening. I can think of a story in my life where there was a woman who was part of our church. She was 30 years older than me at the time. She was not married. She had never had children. Our politics were opposite. Our upbringings were very, very different. Like on paper, we had nothing in common, but I saw something in her that seemed maybe like, I felt a little bit lonely, and I could just see a little bit of that in her eyes. Like maybe she's a little lonely too. And I thought she was funny. There was this one little bit of like common ground. And so I went with it and I put myself out there a little bit. And then she kind of put herself out there too. And she became one of my absolute best friends of my life. We started meeting for coffee once a week. Our lives were so dramatically different. We built the kind of trust so that we could talk about our differences. Like we never did end up aligning in some of these areas, but we let ourselves be curious about each other rather than condemning. And I just learned so much through my friendship with Becca. So I'm always out there. Becca passed away a couple of years ago, and
Oh,
I know, I'm always remembering her as such a beautiful example in my life to stop being, to kind of resist being grouped with people like me. I'm using air quotes there. And just be open to who's close to me, who is near me, and what would it look like to just be curious and to start listening and having that conversation and just wait and see where it goes.
that's a good
Wow.
point. Maybe we shouldn't look for people just like us, because Misty, that person's already judged you.
Yeah.
It's true.
There's a lot here to
It's
judge.
true. It goes both ways. It does.
Yeah.
It does. And I think even, our churches often group us according to similarity and life phase and all those things. And I understand it on some level, but I just, once we landed in this church that was too small to do that, like we couldn't have groups because there weren't enough of us. And so we were kind of forced together. And it was such a beautiful experience
Mm.
of just, maybe we don't have to just be looking for people living a similar life than us. Maybe we can just embrace what's around us and go with it. It's kind of fun.
Well,
Love it.
even what tracks you in a marriage is an opposite. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting thought.
True.
Yeah.
Yes. So true. Yeah. Well, awkward me loves so much of what you are sharing, and I'm hearing so loud and clear. Get our eyes off of ourselves and trying to project ourselves as something. And I love that word curious. Interesting.
Yeah.
My son married into a Hispanic family, a huge Hispanic family.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
been an interesting coming together of cultures through all of the years. They've been married almost 15 years now. And I hear what you're saying about being nudged into those awkward places and being prodded into conversations that were like, I don't really know where I'm going with this, how to relate to this, what's happening. And so I find myself a lot of time in these great big family gatherings that, wow, I have a nice sized family, but it's not their size.
Right.
And
Yeah.
turning my eyes off of me and on to them has changed things so much when I stopped worrying about, am I saying the right thing? Am I saying the wrong thing?
Yeah.
Well, probably I am, but they
Yes.
seem to forget,
Yes.
Well,
Yeah, exactly. A lot of our neighbors around us are Latino families, with some of them we have language barriers, all these things that just make it feel like extra layers of kind of difficulty or complexity. I think in those situations, what I've learned is I get to receive hospitality in those situations. We keep being invited. It's like we're the luckiest people alive is how it feels. And we get invited into their homes and into their garages where they host these amazing parties and on their
Yes.
patios. We often don't know what to say, or we just literally can't communicate. But what we can do is receive, take that plate of food, say gracias, say thank you. They're trying their best to speak with us. And so we can try, it feels so hard to try to speak a language we're not comfortable with, but we can take some of that burden too. And in those situations to kind of posture ourselves as the one receiving, rather than the one, giving or offering. It's a really healthy place to settle into that.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, you talk about something and it's kind of like gosh, I should have had a V8 moment, but the next time that you need help, ask for it.
Right. That's my favorite tip.
Yeah, that
Yep.
independence is overrated. And it's funny, and I think back when I grew up, gosh, my dad was Mr. Fix-It, and he could fix almost anything. And neighbors were always walking over into the garage when my dad was in there and then asking him how to do things. And I think there was just a lot of community in our garage with my dad.
Yeah.
But we don't do that today.
We don't. We are taught to be independent, and it's to our peril.
Right.
It's not working. It's not giving us the result that we want because we're learning to be independent and to at least present ourselves like we have it all together. We can solve our own problems, but we wind up alone in our homes feeling a little lonely a lot of the time. And meanwhile, we've got people all around us. I think about this. We buy our homes for whatever reason, 100 different reasons why we choose a particular home. We move into it, and then we spend the rest of our lives there, mostly not connected to the people around us. Most of us don't know our actual neighbors. And,
Right.
I use this word neighbor. I stretch it for all it's worth. I think neighbor means much more than the people to the right and to the left of us. But I also think it makes a lot of good sense. If we're choosing a place, we're choosing to live in a place, it just makes a lot of sense that we would put a little bit of effort into knowing at least the faces and the names of a few of the people closest to us, because when tragedy strikes, when something happens, they're the people closest to us.
Yeah.
And there's just something about, even though most of us aren't going to necessarily become best friends with our next door neighbors, there's something about just recognition, kind of that small wave or that smile or that hello that gives us that sense of connection. Like, oh, I belong here. This is my home and I belong here.
I like that. Well, I love your quote. You say, showing up needy sets the tone for a life of ordinary connectedness. You go first and others will follow.
Love it.
Yeah. I think that's what neighboring is. It's taking turns asking for what we need and offering what we can. And I think so many of us, we're more comfortable being the ones offering what we can,
Yep.
Saving the day. That feels so good. And it does feel so good, which is why we need to allow the people around us to do the same for us. A lot of, my husband is the chaplain of our county jail, and a lot of the people in our lives close to us are rebuilding after incarceration. A lot of them have suffered addiction and generational poverty and a lot of these things. I found myself really challenged to receive from folks who have lived a difficult life, but we all want to be generous. We all want to be trusted. And so in order for this to work, it has to go both ways.
The cup of sugar. When's the last time that's happened?
What happened to that?
That has ceased to exist. I mean, that's been years,
It doesn't have to. That practice is alive and well in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
We are borrowing the cup of sugar, the cup of oil, the eggs, the rake, the ladder.
Yeah.
But it takes somebody to go first. And then if we are the ones who show up needy and ask for help, then it kind of puts that thought in their minds like, oh, and it's not that it's a keeping score,
Right.
but it's like, oh, now I can ask for help too. It sets that at a really connected place. And it really, really works. It's my favorite tip. It's my favorite tip. Ask for something. Even if you could solve it on your own. Kroger is less than a mile away. I could get there and buy the eggs.
Right.
But it's just better. It's better to let somebody else near me kind of save the day. And then if you want to, with whatever you're baking, you can return the favor by a plate of cookies or whatever it is.
And if you go to Kroger, I mean, you miss out on conversation that you wouldn't normally have. So,
So true. You tackle something that, is not always comfortable to talk about, but I think it's important that we do, especially in the day and age that we're living in, and that is racism that you've witnessed in the lives around you, including your kids, and ways that we can all learn and grow, because this is just as important that we talk about these things. Yeah. So what are a couple of ideas on how to move forward when we feel stuck or we feel discouraged by what we're seeing, because I think it's probably happened to the majority of us. You find
Yeah.
yourselves in a situation, you're like, what do I do here?
Right. Yeah. My husband and I are white parents of 4 non-white children. And
Mm.
I say children, but our youngest is 14 and our oldest is 28. And so, they're
Wow.
not little kids anymore. And
Yeah.
as they grew, honestly, our 28-year-old, our kids all came to us through adoption. Our oldest, our 28-year-old, came into our family most recently when he was 19, and he is a
Mm.
Black man. And so watching him come into our family as a full-grown adult Black man has been eye-opening. And at the same time, my younger kids were getting older. They're all teenagers at this point. But even when they were small, I mean, they were not untouched by racism. And it's been a journey for us. It's been a process. My husband and I both grew up in almost exclusively white communities. We had a lot to learn. I think one of the most important things for us was to really um, believe the experiences of our children, of our neighbors, of our community, to believe that racism is still alive in this world. It's still happening. I think there were conversations that kind of tried to dismiss that or shut that down, and that wasn't going to be helpful. So for me, I think that's the number one thing, is to be listening to people of color, to be listening to their experiences, to follow people from different races, ethnicities, whatever, on social media. I mean, we have these resources. We have Wi-Fi, we have library cards. We can be buying books and listening to podcasts, and being really intentional about re-educating or educating ourselves, and just believing what we're hearing, and then deciding that we aren't going to be bystanders.
That's really good.
Wow.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Good.
It's amazing just to think. We've just come through another election season, which
Yeah.
reminds me of the differences between us all,
Yes.
and even the I'll just use the word rage that can
Yeah.
come up between all of us. So I loved reading this quote of yours: curiosity lights our way to compassion. So how does this tie to learning to disagree well? Because if we're talking about neighbors and forming relationships, they're just going to naturally be with people who are different from us, don't you think?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
how can we
Yeah.
learn from each other and become a better, you have this
Mhm.
title that perked my ears, how to actually listen better.
Yeah. I think so much of what we're struggling through would ease up a little if we would learn to listen to each other. And this
Mm,
doesn't mean, we could give all of the caveats, that this doesn't mean that, I'm not going to sit and listen to somebody talk in a way that would dehumanize my children or my neighbors. Like, I'm not saying we have to give an ear to that or give oxygen to that. But I think most of us are formed by our life experiences, by 100 different things. And just like I said, in the case of my friend Becca, like, coming to sit down with her and understand, like, what was your life like, and what has your experience been, was really illuminating and helping me to understand how she landed in this particular place. And she listened to my experiences and came to some understanding of how I existed in this particular place. And we did kind of grow together in some ways, but it has to begin with a willingness to not make it about ourselves, to resist being defensive, to stop seeing each other as the enemy or a threat to us in some way, and to just find places to actually hear each other.
mm,
I have a particular neighbor who flies a particular flag. I mean, this is one of the things that's happening now, is we're on both sides. We're like flying flags and putting yard
mm.
signs, and
Mm.
and
Yes.
and so they're flying a particular flag. I've had a particular sign in my yard, and we live very close to each other, and we would both probably feel like, oh no, like, we are too different. But I know that they have sat at my dining room table,
Uh-huh.
and they know that they have sat at my dining room table, and we have shared meals together. And so, like, we might know that we have these differences, but I also think we both know that if they ever needed anything, I would have their back. And
Mm,
if I ever need anything, I believe they would have my back. And so it does something to our brains where it's like, okay, we have these big differences, but maybe there's more than just these differences. Maybe we can have this like shared humanity and honoring each other in some way and allowing ourselves to just be curious in the midst of those differences.
Wow, that is fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, I applaud that because it seems like we've become so cloistered with our political
Yeah.
views. And to know that you can have somebody that thinks completely different than you, and you can actually like each other.
You don't have to be afraid of each other.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, and because
or to assume that right off the bat. Yeah.
My wife and I have some friends that think differently than we do politically, and we love them. And that can be fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's good. I think that should be celebrated, and that, you know, you can have friends that way, and that should be the way it is. I think that's awesome. Yeah.
We've lost a little bit of that, I think. And
I think you're right.
And that's where I mean, I do think it has its limits. And I'm not saying that, you know, any type of behavior is okay. I'm not, you know, we don't have to go into all those things.
Yeah.
There's a line there. But rather than just making the automatic assumption of like, oh, we can't be friends.
Right.
I think we can and should do that work to prove ourselves wrong about that.
Yeah.
No, I think the more that we can somehow see the other side, or somehow see that person that is on the other side is an okay person as a personal is, you know, personally, then I think that you can at least see the other side a little bit, and then you can meet in the middle somewhere, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
And if that other person, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and then you actually have the permission, if you will, to share your side.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say too, is it has to be a little bit of a give and take. I mean,
Yep.
we can and should be listening and curious, but it kind of requires the same from the other person.
It does.
But if you find that situation where you're both able to kind of coexist and talk peaceably about even some of the things that are hard to talk about, that's just a really beautiful place to begin.
Absolutely. I agreed.
Something that you brought up just now, which I think is, it could be our go-to in situations where we do find those differences coming out, is that defense mechanism.
Yeah.
We jump to defend what we believe, which, I mean, honestly, I cannot think of a situation where that's ever happened and that was productive. Like, it's just, it never really works out well. And you talk about, you know, just some simple questions we can ask ourselves that kind of helps us reclaim that, honestly, I'm so sensitive to things. You know, I'm too sensitive. We kind of wear it as a badge of honor sometimes. And so what are some of those questions we can ask to move past that point and be able to have a productive conversation?
Well, I just think, you know, asking simply, it's the most simple place, but like, tell me more. Like, can you say more? Say more about that. That's something that has been modeled well for me by really thoughtful friends in my life. And I find myself doing that more, even with my teenagers, my kids, like, hey, say more about that. Tell me more. I think that lets us know that, like, I'm here, I'm listening. You've got the floor. I want you to be heard. It doesn't mean we have to agree on whatever it is you're about to say, but to invite that discussion, to invite that conversation helps, because I'm like you. I can really tend towards defensiveness. I have kind of like a fiery, almost activist personality. Like, I have all these big feelings about things, and I have to work at this. Like, it doesn't necessarily come naturally or easily, but you know, we're told to love our neighbor, and that there's something really powerful about that. Our neighbor is not the one who is like us. Our neighbor is not the one who shares our politics or our faith. I mean, we start talking about neighbors and it's like all bets are off. I mean, you just, there's going to be a lot of difference there. And yet we are still told to love our neighbor. So yeah, I just think slowing down, making space, not running away, you know, staying in it, staying in those conversations, that's where we start.
That's good. You know, frequently people use the word awkward to describe themselves today. A lot of us are awkward.
Yep.
You said that awkward kind of needs a new PR campaign. Talk about that.
Yeah. I just think we're all it. It doesn't have to be something that we see as a flaw in us. I think it's just part of the human experience. It's wired into us. It's part of being human. You know, we're feeling it in different ways. And so rather than being afraid of it, and rather than that being what holds us back, to just accept that we all kind of feel that way sometimes. And maybe that's the thing that actually really powerfully unites us to each other,
Yeah.
is that, you know, recognizing it's not just me. Like anytime we can take the focus off of ourselves, which is hard, and kind of flip that around and say, okay, this person is probably feeling the same way I'm feeling. It just takes that pressure off and gives us a different kind of shared common ground.
Yeah. We're all awkward.
I think we are.
Yeah.
I think that's
You
the
know-
good news. That's the good news.
Yeah.
I think
Exactly.
when people ask me in this new year, you have given me my resolution. It's to start with hello.
I like
Oh,
it.
good.
I know it. I know it. I
Amen.
know it. I need to work on that. And what great advice you have to share in this book.
It's a good book. All right, we'll end with our last question. We ask all of our guests. Shannan, what brings you joy?
Boy, what brings me joy right now is I work part-time as a cook in our community kitchen.
Oh, fun.
So I spent my day there yesterday. I'll be back on Thursday, and being in that kitchen, working with my coworkers, making a delicious lunch for my community, and being with those community members who are just funny and fun and complicated people. It is one of the great joys of my life.
Sounds. Now I'm hungry.
Hey, you're invited. If you're ever in Goshen, anybody can stop by and get a free lunch.
I
Sounds
love
great.
that. That's cool. We need to start
there.
something like that here.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's right. All right.
Love it.
I have a community. Tell me. Let's go. Let's feed it.
True.
Thank you, Shannan. Really appreciate
Thank
your
you
time.
all.
Yeah.
Yes, great to meet you.
Good
So
stuff.
nice to meet you.
All right.
Thank you.